Good morning. It is Thursday, February the 23rd, and it is after 9, so we will begin our Finance Committee meeting with the South Carolina Water and Sewer Authority. And I do call this meeting to order. And I will turn it over to our Executive Director, Mr. Schroyer.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you all being here this morning for our first of two Finance Committee meetings that we have scheduled, one this month and one next month. So we're anxious to see how much we get through today. As always, we've kind of set up our meetings to be kind of a 9 to noon series today, so hopefully we can adhere to that. Later this morning, we will have our our engineering director, Mark Hamlet, joining us probably within the next 40-45 minutes, and he'll pick up on topics as far as the CIP, which is near the end of our agenda. So, in terms of staff introductions this morning, for the record, I'm Scott Schroyer, Executive Director for SIGWASA. We also have with us our Board Secretary and PIO, Crystal Lee, here this morning, and also Richard Bowman, our Finance Director. So, again, thank you for joining us this morning for the review of our FY 23-24 budget meeting. So I would like to go on to the next budget item and turn this over to Richard, our Finance Director, to cover the FY 22-23 budget review in terms of the budget message and budget ordinance. And you will find that in the booklet that you have in front of you here. And if you turn to page 4, which you'll see the red numbers at the bottom of your page, that's where we will start. So Richard, I'll turn it over to you this morning. Thank you for being here.
Sure. Good to be here this morning. Good to see everybody this morning. So we try to keep the agenda consistent with prior years. The first things on the agenda are kind of touch base with what we had in the budget the current year, the 22-23 year. So in front of you, you'll have budget message for the current year. You see just basically some of the criteria that's in the budget. There's nothing there that's extremely important to re-highlight other than as we get to the new year budget, proposed budget, we'll go over some of these and say that's the same as prior year or it's an increase on the prior year. The second thing on page 5 is the corresponding ordinance for the current fiscal year. And we've covered that pretty well in the board meetings and the quarterly updates. And of course, I'll just touch on the fact that the main important thing there is that current fiscal year budget, as we know, because we were looking at a new rate model, new rate structure, the board approves appropriating approximately $646,000 in fund balance to help out the budget for the current year. Of that, about $230,000 was unfunded depreciation. So at that time, we were looking at covering about $410,000, $415,000 worth of operating expenses. That's pretty much a recap of the current fiscal year budget. Are there any questions on any of that? Anything that I missed that you want to highlight, Scott?
No, I think it's...
Or if you want me to go through the whole summary, I will.
No, not at all. I think, again, as Richard mentioned, we provide this as a reference as where we are sitting currently and what we're building towards in our next fiscal year. So if the Finance Committee members have no questions or comments, we'll just continue to move on.
No questions from you?
Okay, very good. Thank you.
So the next section, starting on page 10, I believe, is the rate structure options. Is that you or me?
That is you. So we're going to review the board-approved rate model in effect for FY 23 and 24. So before I have Richard kind of go over these slides for us, I just want to remind the Finance Committee that we came out of about a year-long study to look at the rate model as far as SIGWASA had, and this was initiated by the Finance Committee about 2 years ago, coming out of our budget meetings in our process. And the board approved a rate model change last September, and basically we've built our budget this year off of that. So we thought it was appropriate just to remind the Finance Committee members kind of where we are in this process as far as our structure altogether. So, Richard, if you want to just cover some of our slides here on page 8 and 9.
Sure.
Thank you.
As Scott said, we thought it was important to go into the budget and rates for the upcoming fiscal year and the proposals to revisit, because if you're like me, we looked at so many different alternatives back a year and a half ago. It's important to touch base with what the board actually settled on. So on page 8, you'll see that some of the objectives of the rate study when the board and finance committee directed Brett Tullis to perform the study, was to consider removing or reducing the minimum allowance included in the base charge in the past, and to look at implementing a two-tier rate structure for residential customers. And that is what option 2 in there, they provided 2 options, option 1 and option 2. Option 2 implemented a two-tier volume structure for residential customers. And just to retouch on some of the things that were in option 2, the rate model, the one that the board adopted, was it basically removed the minimum allowance. Before, you recall, there was 2,000 gallons of usage built into our base charge. The two-tier system that the board chose, option 2, now has 0 gallons built into the base charge. This model implements a two-tier volume charge for residential customers only, just reiterating commercial, industrial, institutional, all pay a single volume charge. There's no tier system for non-residential. And it basically, the tiers were broken on customers using up to 4,000 gallons and then over 4,000 gallons. So we'll see as we look at the numbers that that's when the increase occurs. So customers below 4,000 and below will pay X dollars per thousand. Customers using 4,000 gallons or below will pay a slightly higher volume charge. And you'll see the second slide on page 9 gave the board a idea of where some sample bills would be on that two-tiered structure for residential customers, and they gave you a chart with 0 gallons, 1,000 gallons, going up to 10,000 and up to 15,000 gallons, and that chart shows you what our current rates at that time were, and what a sample bill would look like, and what it would look like under the new rate structure. And I think everybody will remember that basically the people before that were 2,000 and below that had it built into the rates, they would see a possible bill reduction because now there's no gallons built into the rates. On page 10, that's how we get to the rate structure changes. I will say, as part of the rate structure discussion, just to remind everybody that the rate structures were to achieve the same level of revenue needed to balance the budget and so forth. And the board did vote, I can't remember that date, I believe it was in May, maybe, or August, to choose option 2. So that is the one we're running with. As we go into the budget section of the discussion, we're basing it on option 2 that the board chose.
Yeah, so that was actually in September of last year. I mean, it was presented to the board, the entire board in May. We did the presentation. And then it was actually in September that it was brought back to the board. The board then did approve that unanimously moving forward. So once again, in doing that for us, helped us build our budget then moving forward for this year. So any questions about the rate model, what we were trying to achieve?
No questions.
We will, in the next couple of pages, get to seeing how that rate model applies across all those different volumes, and also targets our 90% funding of CIP. So that's coming up on, let's see, page 15. So before we get to page 15, we actually want to talk about our FY23-24 proposed budget. And again, our first bullet is the budget message and budget ordinance. Okay, so I will have Richard walk you through this more from top to bottom, if we will, just so that we look at these numbers within here. So Richard, why don't you go ahead and get us started on this draft budget message that we have prepared for today.
Sure. So the legislative memo on page 11 is the typical executive director's budget message. This is a draft budget message specifically for the finance committee meeting today, but it contains most of the things that are in the 23-24 proposed budget. As it's presented today, it is a balanced budget, and we'll just go through these points, like I said earlier, and we'll contrast them if there's any major changes from the current year. So it's balanced. It provides sufficient funds to meet the debt obligations of the organization and provides for annual operations of the utility systems. Fiscal year 23-24 budget was developed to use no existing fund balance. That is in contrast with the ordinance we follow in the current year. We had a discussion last year with the Finance Committee and the board that when we implemented the new rate structure, the goal, of course, was and needs to be that we recapture anything funded operating expenses, and so we have built that into the new rate plan. Key elements of the 23-24 budget is that the revenues, out of the implementation of the new rate structure, that the water revenue projections are increased 8% compared to 22-23. The sewer revenue projections were increased by 8% compared to 22-23. When we get further on into the budget discussion, we'll talk about how those revenues increase, why, and how that corresponds to budget. And the capital revenue will fund utility infrastructure asset depreciation at 90%, so we kept the current year funding, or the proposed funding for the new year, at the same level that the Finance Committee and Board approved current 22-23 year. Of course, we've got some charts in later in the discussion as to whether that's still the level the Board will look at, the Finance Committee will recommend. And when we get to pay and benefits, we'll cover that. These are the same sections you saw in last year's legislation and the budget message. There were no positions being added currently in the proposed budget. There's a 5% wage schedule adjustment. There's an average performance merit increase of 3% for employees based on a merit pay range of 0 to 4%. There's an increase of 0.75% for the local government employees retirement system. That's required by the state. That's the same increase as last year. An increase of 10% to medical and dental premiums and a 5% increase to vision medical premiums. That's in line with, I think, market that everybody's seeing. And we left the matching 401k contribution at 1%. The Finance Committee will remember the pay study that was done 5 years ago, recommended implementing a 401k matching plan. The goal, I think, at that time was to implement the first year with 1% and then increase it each year up till we reach 5% to be competitive with other surrounding communities and towns and counties. Unfortunately, the budget hasn't allowed us to go past 1% at this point, so we left the proposed budget at 1% for the Finance Committee to determine. Related to non-pay expenses that are in the budget, we all know, and we've talked about in the quarterly board meeting, financial updates to the board, that there's substantial increases in supply costs, fuel costs, and chemical costs due to inflation. You can see as we go over into the things, one of the largest increases in the proposed budget is chemical costs. I think they increased on total about 34%. You can imagine that being one of the largest expenses that WASA has. A 34% increase is quite significant to our budget. It includes replacing or purchasing equipment that totals $96,225 and software costing $155,000. It includes scheduled large utility repairs that have been identified by the superintendent and the engineer and the director, totaling $185,500. It includes completion of the hazardous chemical removal from the water treatment plant facility. That project is in the budget for $41,500. It still includes the $2.3 million for depreciation expense, which is in line with the last two previous fiscal years. And as we said earlier, right now the proposed budget has it funded at 90%. It includes $117,843,000 for the annual maintenance agreements on all the water towers. That's very in line with last year with a couple of small increases that are allowed by contract.
Sorry, breakdown.
Okay, let's pause. Let's pause before we turn the page, and I would like to just start again, and we're just going to take it section by section to see what questions or comments the Finance Committee has here. So our first paragraph talked about the use of no fund balance for this budget. I think that's really important. I'd just like to emphasize that part of our rate model helped us get there as well, but it was also our goal going into this, not to rely on fund balance. It was somewhat of a challenge, wouldn't you say, Richard? Initially, we had many discussions as we were looking at budgets, and there's more asks than there is revenue to support those asks at this point across our organizations. That's very typical, but what we do is we ask the team members in each department to come up with their list and prioritize that list of their needs. And their needs are quite great, but from our perspective, these are things that we'll just have to string out over the next 4 or 5 years to accomplish. But the benefit is that they've listed their needs and prioritized their needs, and we try to fund as many as we can moving forward. We didn't want to get too heavy this year in a lot of things as far as expenses, and the reason for that is we've changed our rate model. That was a big thing for us. We want to be a little bit conservative this year in our approach. And we do track this, as you're aware, on a monthly and quarterly basis, and we have those meetings and presentations with the board. But we thought what we would do this year, be a little bit fiscally conservative in the areas, just to march through this first year to see where we are in terms of that approach. So that was really our approach going into this. And I'm very happy that we're able to maintain and promote a 9% balance for our infrastructure as far as our CIP, and also no use of fund balance at this point. So I'll just pause there to see if the board has any questions or comments about those items in that first paragraph.
I am so glad that you have been so fiscally responsible to let this first year, let's see how this first year goes and before we make any major changes, because that is my concern too, is let's see how things go with this change. And on our side, we can't control the consumer side, but we can control our side, and not using fund balance and being able to do this, that is, to me, that's a major change, and I think it's a great change, and we're moving in the right direction.
Right.
And I hope everybody sees that.
Hopefully.
I'm very proud of what you and I have helped to do here. I really am.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's also under our finance director's guidance as well.
Well, of course, Richard, Richard.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you, Richard, for that.
Yes, thank you.
And that's not to
You
say that.
squeeze these numbers as tight as you can.
And you know, that's not the Yeah, very good. All right, so in terms of our revenues, we've talked about our infrastructure asset depreciation 90%. We talked about increasing its value to 100%. Comments on that from the committee?
Again, I don't want to do it this year.
Okay. And again, we try to put you in a position, we thought 90% is good. We've been there for a couple of years. We did make that increase a couple of years ago from 80% to 90%, looking at 100% coming up. I think what will be interesting for you is when we actually turn to a couple slides in the future, you will see the difference between the 90% and the 100%, and it's getting closer in terms of being able to fund that. So that's something that will be there for us as well.
Maybe by next year.
Yeah. Payroll and benefits. No positions were added. I wanted to add about 5 positions this year to the operations and the organizations. But again, I think it's something that we just need to put off for that. So we
Can we?
Pardon?
Can we?
Can we add those positions?
No, can we put them off? I don't want to put the company in jeopardy by not adding those
It's
positions.
pushing it another year down the road is what we're doing here. But we looked at that again, and I looked at taking the 5 positions maybe down to 1 or 2, maybe 3 at the most. But then again, I just thought, no, I just can't see doing that at this point. We didn't run any incremental change or analysis on our current budget from where we are. I just wanted to bring that to the finance committee at this point. So we looked across our organization, and you've heard this now for 2 years, that we could use more staffing on our second and third shifts of our plan. So 2 positions I was looking at. One was the second shift operator in wastewater. One was the second shift operator in the water plant. So we looked at those positions, and this last year in our discussions, we asked the superintendents, and Mark Hamlin, our engineering director, is now the manager for our utilities, said, where are those positions best in place if we could do this? And we discovered that second shift provides us with the most flexibility at this point with 1 more team member, because that team member can go to third shift or back to second shift if necessary. It provides a little bit of coverage for us. And you all know that covering that third shift as far as trying to find employees for that can be challenging. We do it, but it can be challenging. So the second shift is a little bit easier to find. I wanted to put 2 people in utilities this year. That's our team that does the water and wastewater in the field, if you will, our pump stations, and also our hydrants and valves. Now, this has been a major discussion with the board over the last 6 to 8 months that we need to do more with the hydrant maintenance. 2 employees were going to be dedicated to that task, if you will, to do more valve maintenance, do hydrant maintenance, the painting, the greasing, the testing. I just don't see it presently in this budget. We're also a little bit strapped in terms of contractual services to do that. So that was the pressure that we're facing this year. to move along with what the board and executive director would like to see in the organization, but we're just not there this year. Now, where will we be mid-year? I'm not sure. Let's see where we are mid-year in our budget process. There may be an opportunity to revisit that, and I would be happy to revisit that with the finance committee or the board if you feel it's appropriate during one of our maybe mid-year reviews. But I just wanted to be upfront with there's nothing in this budget that really takes care of that task. Okay, so the other position rounding out the 5 was in the administration, which was support and finance for I think we call it an account technician. Basically to work within the organization. We see a key position needed within our utility billing area or a finance area, if you will, that can help us with some areas that we need support in. We've got a lot of things going on, so that's a position that I would like to fund as well in the near term. So those are kind of my top 5 positions immediately, if you will. And of course, we would start to round out additional positions in the future by adding more team members at the plants and utilities as we need those moving in future years for additional tasks such as possibly bringing the sewer cleaning and maintenance TV in-house, where we would actually try to replace existing contractual services with taking that same money and investing in our own equipment. We talked a lot about that last year at these hearings as well, but we see that opportunity in front of us. We took the steps earlier this year during the summer to look at some of the large equipment that we would actually use for that. Let's talk sewer cleaning at this point. Our sewer jet equipment is still running about $500,000 for a new piece of equipment to maintain everything that we need to do to bring the service in-house. You're also going to have some resource needs of 2 technicians, basically, that you would bring in-house for that as well. We have some pumping and hauling that goes on that we contract out. The board is aware of that because we recently made those approvals with a contract for the next couple of years. So we have the opportunity through contractual services that's already funded in our budget, and we've added some more resources to that as far as financial resources based on needs to meet our needs in this current budget proposed. With our engineering director and our utility engineer on board, our new utility engineer, Dan Owens, I've asked our utility director to actually go through the financial analysis in the next 6 months, along with the finance director, and look at could we possibly bring that service in-house with a zero net effect on costs. So that's the analysis we'll look at. We're basically setting ourselves up for next fiscal year, if you will, to take a look at that. So that's the analysis that we'll be going through in the next 6 to 8 months to look at that. So.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. As you know, the county is going through their budget process, and we were sent a budget survey to complete, and it's where you prioritize things. But you also had a section there that you could write in things you wanted to see. And in mine, I included $750,000 for equipment for SWAS. Now, whether anybody else has that in their wish list, so to speak, I don't know, but I'm trying to plant the seed. Hopefully it will grow, and hopefully we'll get a little traction, and we can get the county to start helping out some. Because we keep expressing how important Sequasa is to the county in terms of economic development. So we're hoping that they see the value, and some of us can push to get some return from the county in that.
If you do that, will the Carr Lake regional waters, will they expect the same amount of money?
I don't see why they should.
Okay. I just don't want you to propose something and
I'm sure there's other entities within the county that would want similar consideration, but if we can get it in the budget, and I don't really expect it to happen this year, hopefully it'll happen next year. That doesn't mean I'm not going to push to have it put in there this year. It's just we have a lot of priorities that I hope doesn't supersede that, but
Well, I know
we'll know in a few weeks.
Creedmoor had earmarked $125,000 for Seguasa last year with ARPA, and as far as I know, that money is still restricted. So I think that there's probably a question of how do we give that money to Seguasa, and what MOU has to be drafted and all that other stuff. But it's still earmarked, and I can present it in our budget again too.
Yeah,
Now it's up to Button girlfriend.
Oh, yeah, we done that.
Oh.
There may be opportunities with that Creedmoor ARPA money to use towards maybe the Lake Road Booster Pump upgrade project, which is an infrastructure project, right? A jetback is a piece of equipment. We really appreciate the county's efforts to help us fund that. That would be huge for us, but there may be opportunities as well on some future infrastructure needs directly affecting our utility systems over in the Creedmoor service area. So I'm glad that you brought that up as well.
So, the ARMs, or AMRs,
Yes, the water meters.
yeah, the water meters, are we done installing the new ones yet?
No, we are not. In
Okay.
fact, one of our projects that we have in this budget is actually moving us forward with the replacement of the approximately 2,200 water meters within the city of Creedmoor, Seguasa service area.
Let you finish. Okay.
22.
I remember you swapped mine out and a lot of them in our neighborhood.
We've done a couple of
But you were still
neighborhoods.
testing design models at that time. I
Right,
think.
so we've changed out a neighborhood or two, but not the bulk of
Okay.
the meters that have to be changed out, and that would be done on what we call a mass meter change out, so it's very short term as far as changing those out. Now, the board did approve, earlier last year, the purchase of 535 water meters plus, additional equipment to upgrade the manual red water meters, and there were many in the city of Creedmoor that we changed out as well. So those are the ones where physically someone had to go and read the meter. Now those have been all changed over to the AMR radio read type and / AMI capable in the future. So now those are being picked up throughout.
So
the
does that changeover help with the personnel numbers? Because you don't have to physically have somebody go into the field and.
It does. Ultimately, it does. In fact, you can take your reading window of 10 days, we give it now, to a shorter period because we're able to collect that data quicker. Now, there's always going to be metering needs that those technicians do as well, and adjustments and change out, things like that. It just allows us to be a little bit more aggressive on those type of work orders and the work that needs to be done on that infrastructure. So it's work that you're always going to be doing, but if we can get those reads down to a shorter cycle period, the better we are for that.
So we could use our personnel in another area.
This is going to be a great boost for our utility infrastructure, our utility billing, to have a single platform meter and a reading system, because we've been dealing with manual reads and another vendor type reads and another vendor type reads, and then our team has to take all that information and bring it back together for our utility billing system. So it's quite a challenge. So this is a great move this next year to do that. So we anticipate sometime this summer that we'll actually do that meter change out. We're actually in the process of putting that program together. So
Do we have an end date for this project?
my goal right now is December 1st of this
Okay.
calendar year to be completed with that. So we'll know more about that as we actually get into the RFP and the timetables for that. So it'll be a large meter purchase that we will do, and then it'll be professional services to bring a crew in to manage that, right? So, and I'll speak a little bit more to that later on in our capital outlay, if you will. Moving on to payroll and benefits, item 2, a 5% wage schedule adjustment. We know from last year, I think we had a 2% in there, right, Richard? That's correct. And then the Finance Committee and the board looked at increasing that wage last year across the board for our employees based on what was going on around us.
Right.
And ultimately, the board decided to offer a one-time payment bonus to our employees instead of adjusting that COLA. So what we looked at this year coming into our budget cycle is we took all that into account from last year. We also did surveys just around the area, or the greater area, if you will, just to kind of get a feel for where everyone else is. Of course, we don't need to follow what everyone else is doing, but taking all that into account, we felt confident that at least suggesting to the Finance Committee a 5% wage schedule adjustment and and that's what you will find in our budget.
Okay.
Okay? The merit increase has not changed, and the last three bullet items on that payroll benefits section has not changed either. Any questions on payroll benefits?
The 401K plan, I know that when we did a match at 1%, Tim was the chairman at the time when we did it. Have we seen more employees joining the 401K since we started doing the match? Is it making an impact? Is it helping them?
I can address that from the payroll side. So the answer is yes.
Okay.
Significant change. When I believe prior to, don't hold me to the number, but prior to the implementation of that 4 years, roughly 4 years ago, I believe we had maybe 5.
I remember that. It was about that. It was that very low.
42, 45 employees, about 5. I believe that number is up to about 15 as of the current month. So we probably triple, I would say, as a safe
Okay.
thing to say in participation.
That's good.
So yeah, I think it did have an impact.
Because I remember we said that if we saw an impact change, we would increase it eventually. And I think we set up to 5%.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That was our case study recommendation
Yeah.
from the match group 5 years ago, was that you start off with one and do one as budget allows each year to get up to at least 5, to be competitive with your surroundings.
And I would have to say that it's I know this, that our HR manager also promotes that with all of our employees too. There's been a big marketing push behind that. So we try to catch new employees right off the bat for existing employees. So that may be an item that we may want to earmark for further review for next year's budget as we get through this year. And we're kind of leaning towards possibly maybe inching up towards 100% funding of CIP appreciation, and inch up a little bit in these areas. I mean, that's analysis that we can run this next year as we're putting our budgets together. Remember, we start this process in November, December.
Right.
There's never really a time that we're not doing this, quite honestly, but those ideas help coming into the budget process.
How expensive would it be to move it 0.5% to 1.5%?
I don't know that the system allows that. We have to look into that.
Okay.
Assuming it does.
With, 2% it would at
More
least
enticing.
double it. It would probably be more because you probably have more participation.
Yeah.
In the budget, that brings up a good item while I'm looking at that number. In the budget, just so everybody understands, in the budget, we assume 100% participation because we don't know what that number is going to be. And the effect is immaterial to the total budget as a whole. So it's the safest thing to assume as things go on during the year that everybody participates. And so that is built into the budget. Assuming 100% participation, 1% match.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe.
And at the 1% match, assuming 100% participation, it's roughly about $28,000 built into the budget for that purpose. So that gives you some idea that if you were going to bump it 0.5%, assuming 100% participation, which we know is never going to happen, you're talking about another 14,000 and so forth and so forth.
So 2% would probably would be nicer to have, it'd be a little bit more enticing.
Right.
And it would have no effect on the budget.
If you went.
It could.
Right, if it had, so that's correct. So you would still want the budget assuming 100% participation, or we could decide the budget 50% participation and the number would stay the same.
Okay.
So we could do,
I think when I was at Wells, it was 3%, and that really was amazing at the time.
And two would be nice. I'm just saying about employee retention.
Yeah, exactly.
And with everyone, as they said in the county, it's just meeting people, the whole county's, struggling for finding good employees, and we don't want to compete with one another, but we want to be, in the playing space.
it would make you more competitive as an employer, I think.
Yeah, because I think Durham is 5%. And we're, there again, we're not trying to match
Yeah,
them.
but they,
But
got a little bit more cash.
I know in at least one instance, the difference between the 401K and 5%. In Durham, 1% with the county it made a difference in an employee.
Right.
They didn't accept the position they welcomed.
Yeah, it does make a difference. And if we're thinking about potentially hiring 5 down the road, we want to make sure that we are competitive.
We can, you want to come back to that item? I'll just make a mark that we can circle back, or is this something that you would like to discuss further right now, that possibly budget 50% participation with the 2% match? I mean, that's what I heard from Richard, that
Yeah.
the budget can pretty much stay the same where we have it presently, but just changing those numbers from 100% to 50% to go 1% to 2%. So is
And then if it changes the budget a lot during the, after 6 months, Richard can come over and decide that.
Yeah.
We can do it.
Yeah, I would like it for it to be 2%.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, is there anything further on that, Richard? Any comments? You got your notes on that?
I've got my notes on that section.
If I may, I'd like to move on to some capital outlay. Bullet item number 1, significant increases in supply costs, fuel costs, and chemical costs due to inflationary factors. That bullet should have been bigger along with that text, Richard, don't you think? I need a larger
Bold.
I think I need a 16-point font instead of a 12-point on that one.
Yes.
That has been the greatest challenge this operating year and also moving forward in the next fiscal year. In fact, when we look at the inflationary factors year over year in our projections, and I think that obviously we were at 7% recently with inflation, 8%, back below 7%, 6%. So we don't know where we're going to be over the course of this next year, but we are looking at that. We have some data that helps support why we're increasing our budget areas on certain chemicals, and I must tell you that it isn't a consistent percentage increase across the board like it's not as easy to apply a 7% across the board, because some places you have a 5, some places you have a 12, depending on the type of chemical that you have. So that's something that we dialed into this year to figure out what that is and make those adjustments accordingly in our budget areas. Now, that expense really cuts into other areas in our budget that we would like to do. So, when you have to offset those costs for operation, you can't afford the employees that you want for those programs. That's basically the relationship that you have there. So you go into this thinking that, okay, we know potentially what this cost would be for these programs, for these employees, these services. However, you can't afford those now because of these inflationary costs that you know you're going to have to face this next year. That may not end. This may not be transitory inflation over the next 6 months. It may continue budget year after budget year. Staying away from using fund balance, this is basically why these resources were put on the side to manage through these other operating expenses that we know are very real. So I just wanted you to appreciate that as well. That's one of the things that bumped our program tremendously from any type of expansion, which we were hoping for this year to possibly expand 1 or 2 employees as best we could for the special hydrant program. This is something that I wanted to go into initially, but it just fell out that we couldn't do that. So that's a big one for us this year. And it probably will be for the next couple of years, unfortunately. Anything you want to add to that?
No, I'll just say that, Scott, Mark, and I had 2 very in-depth, in-the-weeds budget meetings looking at the numbers and knowing that we have some difficult choices. And there are always more needs than money.
Is there yelling involved?
There was no yelling involved. We sat across the table from each other just in case. No, they did a great job of going through, because, I can run the numbers for them, but deciding where the needs are is more in their department. And I think we did a great job of looking at the needs and criticality to them and saying, okay, in a year when chemicals increase this much, we're going to have to table this one. So I just want to say they did a great job of giving us the budget we got, because there were some significant challenges that nobody a year ago would have suspected with the type of inflationary increases we're seeing. And we don't know where that's going to go. As Scott said, whether it's going to remain or it's going to reduce. I don't think anybody knows. So that's not
right. And just one more thing to throw into the mix here, which I think is important. We all know that the near-term horizon for civil offset as far as utility customer growth is not there as well. So we don't have that advantage to say that, okay, that additional revenues may be coming in this next year based on growth. That's still a few years away, as we know, based on the I-85 project. So things do start to look better in the out years here, but they're not as immediate as next year, quite honestly. So just want you to appreciate that as well. If we have a larger customer base, obviously we have greater revenues, SDF fees coming in, allocation fees coming in, those type of things that help to support funding your depreciation on your infrastructure, getting more projects done, having more services out there that we need as well. But we are getting smarter along the way as far as the use of our technology and the services, but there's still more services that we would really like to provide out there as far as maintenance services for our infrastructure. The next item, I'm not going to dive too far into the equipment at the $96,000. At this point, that's something our engineer can manage in our budget to give us some updates on that CIP and those expenses, but I would like to touch briefly on the software. Richard and I have decided this past year that now is an appropriate time to start looking at a change in our financial software.
Everybody's doing
To bring that, well, we thought we were unique, but okay.
I was probably older than everybody else.
Yeah.
It's original.
I have no doubt.
That is on the horizon, and a great portion of that expense is basically the implementation of that software and service changeover. So Richard, would you like to add anything to that, or tell them a little bit more about that program, the length of the program, and how this program has to dovetail in eventually in coordination with the meter changeout program? So these are two programs that you can't do at the same time, or else there's a collision. So let's go ahead and talk about that.
Right, so we thought we stopped out and looked at it for a couple of years now, and of course, due to the cost that you see on that line item, we've hesitated because we had challenges in those years. We decided now is the appropriate time. I will go back to the comment that our software is original to Sequasa. It's been here since 2006. We did one small upgrade back in 2015 around that time frame. Not a lot of enhancements, more just a operating system sort of upgrade. So it's somewhat antiquated. We see that. Some of you do as customers. You see that on the customer side. There's a limited amount you can do and see on the online portal. We've had a lot of feedback from customers in the last 2 years on that we're a little behind the times compared to other vendors. So we're trying to address that, but we thought this was the appropriate time because as we look for a mass meter change out for one whole area of our service area, we wanted to time that to come in with the old software because we have a very dedicated staff that is so good at analyzing the data on the current software, and we have so many good internal controls in place on the existing software that we wanted to do the mass meter replacement on the old software and get all that data in place with software we're used to using, analytical tools we've already got in place, so that if there's any glitches, any exceptions, we catch them before they go into the billing system. So that's one of the things on the mass meter timing that we wanted to get that done before December. On the timing of the software, some of the packages we're looking at, and of course we'll be looking much more in depth in the upcoming, if it stays in the budget and is approved. And of course after July 1st, we'll be looking at comparative selection process to look at all the available software. The one we previewed thus far will do a lot of things that our current software doesn't, and it severely enhances the customer experience on the portal internet side. It'll allow a lot of other things like bill managers and so forth through the system that are already built in without an outside vendor. But also on the financial side, it has a lot more capability for automation. It has automated work order systems, so that everything, you stop shuffling a lot of paper. It has the automated approval of purchase orders and invoices and everything, where everything's captured in the system. So we'll go away from a lot of the manual paper that we've been doing since the process formation and go to a more automated process, a more streamlined process, which we're going to think is going to improve efficiency throughout the organization. So that's one of the goals, and now kind of is the time to do it. As you say, most places review it every 5 years or so, 5 to 7 years. And we have, about 5 years ago, we had looked at it before Scott came on board, and of course at that time we decided we'd get settled again before we took that big bite. So we think we're at that point now, it's safe in the budget.
So has the cost of software changed drastically since you considered it 5 years ago?
Well, what I found is, I recall when we moved into this building, I'll give you an idea of, at that time we had looked at it, and that was 2011, I believe. And the organization that I was working with, that they were changing their software, I believe they paid $110,000, $115,000 at that time. So $155,000 was a lot.
But it's not that much of a change.
But, yeah, considering the times, and, you know, there may be other products out there that are less than this. We did this based on a quote from one of the vendors that we know some surrounding municipalities use. And so we use that as a placeholder. Of course, we may find software, but again, our existing software company, we will of course look at them. Their products right now are not, in my opinion, from what I've seen thus far, they've been as comparable. So theirs would be cheaper. I will say that you'll see in the budget going forward for future years that the annual cost for all software packages are much higher. If you get a better product, the annual cost is going to be more than what you're,
Yeah.
but that's true. I mean, if you've got $1 million house, the annual maintenance on that house is going to cost you a lot more than if your house costs $100,000. Just common sense. So that's where we stand with that item.
Thank you. And the implementation is going to take approximately 10 to 12 months.
That's correct.
There's a lot to do. Again, we're addressing some financial process that is manual, that will be automatic, some purchase orders, those type of things, just to streamline the operations that we have. The meter portion really comes towards the end of that implementation, but it is a long process. So again, it's very heavy on implementation costs versus software, if you will, so that I don't think we'll be carrying that cost annually at that price. But
That's correct. The upfront cost is the largest chunk of the 155 is implementation and the training costs. So you won't see that occurring. And that is a good point. I'm glad Scott brought that up. We will be implementing it in modules. So we'll start with the financial modules one at a time. We'll make sure all of the data being converted from that is working properly before we move on to the next model. And right now, the meter reading billing module is scheduled to be the last one, so that we can get any meter replacements and tweaks to the existing data in place before we undertake that implementation.
So you'll be working on kind of like almost 2 systems for a little while to get it all the way through.
That is correct.
Okay. And is training included in this price?
That does include training. The heaviest part of that is converting the data, implementation, and training. So that is why it's very large. And when you consider that it is a year-long process, you can see why some of the costs are, a little higher, maybe possibly.
Do you know what the monthly cost will be with this one that you're kind of looking at?
It's not going to be a monthly cost, it's going to be an annual cost. And don't hold me to the exact number, but roughly. Now, our existing vendor has increased theirs 3% to 5% per year for the last, since they were purchased by Harris Software. We used to pay under 10,000. Now that number, if I believe correctly, is up to around 19. I think this one, the annual cost, don't hold me to it, but I think it's somewhere in the 36,000 range.
Okay. Just so we have an idea of that.
greater flexibility with this program though across all areas, which is something that this organization needs as we move forward.
That's from me.
Yes, we'll all agree on that point.
All right, Mark Hamlet, Engineering Director, welcome. How are you this morning?
Doing well.
Morning.
Oh, you're fine. You're right on time. You're right on time. I told you it would take us a while to get through some of these items here, so we're glad that you're here. So we're working on page 11. At this point, we're talking about expenses and capital outlay. We were just talking about some of the financial software. We haven't gone over the equipment or the large utility repairs totaling $185,000. That's something we can come back to. But Bart, something I would like you to talk about, since you're here, is the hazardous chemical removal, the water treatment facility totaling $41,500 that's in here. And I'll just start this off by reminding the board that we had a project that we identified earlier in the year as far as hazardous chemicals that were stored on site for many years. And we tried to complete that project at 100%, and fell short of that. So Mark is here to tell us about that project, the reason why we fell short, and the reason why we need to put that in the budget this next fiscal year to complete it. So Mark, if you would.
All right, so as Scott said, we had budget approved earlier this year to remove the chemicals. Our initial estimate, we thought we were good with the amount that was approved. However, when the contractor came on site, they had to sample what was in the totes and in the barrels and see exactly what chemical makeup they were dealing with. There were several totes and barrels and containers that had mixed chemicals in them. That mixture of chemicals raised the hazard level of those chemicals, and it changed the disposal process. So we removed everything we could with the budget that we had approved, but it's still, our current estimates right now, in a quote we received from the contractor, we're still looking at about another $41,000 to properly dispose of these mixed chemicals. You have to perform additional testing. You have to get exactly what the chemical makeup in each container is, so that the hazardous site that's going to take those chemicals knows what it is and knows how to properly dispose of that. So if you have a barrel of just chlorine, that's pretty simple. But if you got a container that's got alum and ferric and a lot of different things mixed up, it's just a lot more difficult to dispose of. So that's where we're at. I think that 41.5 is a little on the high side. I think I don't want to be too optimistic, but I think we can get it done a little bit cheaper than that. But that's our estimate. That's what we budgeted right now. So
That includes the forklift?
Yeah, it includes the forklift.
correct. We've done.
Have we done the testing on these chemicals already to know the composition of the barrels?
So we had a contractor come on site and they took a few samples. I want to say there are around 30 containers left that need to be hauled off, and I think they just spot checked a few. But they actually have to go back out and do a detailed sample of all of that. And we have not done it. We just spot checked to try to figure out.
But that's included in this cost?
Yes, yes.
So there was a decision point that we made about a couple months ago whether we wanted to pursue this additional $40,000 with this project and get it cleaned up this year. And Mark recommended that it could wait for the next fiscal year. We'll just carry this over to the next fiscal year. It wasn't that type of priority that we had to do immediately. We don't want to let this linger on beyond this fiscal year. Obviously, it's something that if the budget gets approved with this in it, we will just exercise this summer, get that site cleaned up and be done with it once and for all. So the chemicals are in totes, they're safe, they're on site, they're behind the fence, everything is fine with them. We just didn't have enough money in the contract to basically facilitate the additional barrels that had to be removed. So we will take care of that next.
That little room still has drums in it?
No, these drums are actually outside the facility.
I remember the little room.
Yeah, some of you may recall on our tour, you still saw some of the totes outside, so.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Before you go,
Yeah.
before you go on to the next bullet item, I want to correct one thing I just said. So I looked that number up from the information. We do currently pay just under like $20,000, so I was correct. The annual maintenance currently is $19,700, just $20,000. The return cost on the new software is projected to be $48,000.
Okay.
I said 40.
Okay.
Close
That's
to
close.
40.
Okay. All right, next bullet item, just covering depreciation expense funded at 90%. We talked about that. I think that the committee is fine with that. I guess I'll ask instead of assuming. 90% is fine with our
90%.
And then the following item, the annual maintenance agreement for all water towers. That's an ongoing program that we've paid for year after year after year. It's a good program that the contractor maintained that for us. But Mark told me recently that it's been a while since we've actually issued an updated request for proposals for that. So what's your schedule for issuing an RFP? Is that something that'll occur in the next 6 months or this next fiscal year?
I assume that we will do that before the end of the current fiscal year. I don't know that we push it until after July. I think within the next couple of months we would issue a new RFP. So it's been, 2018? Did that sound right? Or was it before then? Since
We did an informal review around 2017, 2018. The contracts go back to the first year I was here, which was the end of the first year, 2008. I came on board in 2007, and that was one of the first projects that they implement contracts on.
Well, it's obviously been a number of years, so it's worth it for us, and it can save us money to put a new RFP out.
Yeah, and then we're just being fiscally responsible here. We've done that with the board recently with a couple of contracts, but it's been 4 or 5 years since we've issued an RFP on this. Let's just put this out again and just see competitively where we are. So it may not be cheaper than what we have here, maybe a little bit more, we're not sure. So they're doing a good job for us. It's just time to move on. So, all right, let's get to page 11. So, Richard, would you like to then continue to walk us through 12 and 13, please?
Right, so 12 and 13 are the budget ordinance, proposed budget ordinance for the 23-24. So with everything else in the booklet, this would be what your budget ordinance would look like. If you make any changes, of course, we will bring back a revised proposed one to you. I'll circle back on a couple of things regarding the revenues related back to the legislative memo that committee members mentioned earlier in the discussion. The water revenues are at 5.7. We said at the top that the water revenues are 8%. Now, remember, we're saying revenues, not rates. So we want to clarify that we're not saying rates are going up 8%. The water revenue as a total in the budget is going up 8%, and sewer is going up 8%. With capital being $96,225, you just saw that on the legislative memo. That's replacement of computers and other types of small capital outlay items. I will circle back before we go into rates in the subsequent slides and just remind the Finance Committee, we probably should have touched on this during the rate model discussion, that you were mentioning earlier that we want to be very conservative with the budget this year because we are putting a new car on the road. We'll put a new rate model on the road, and we have to make sure how it runs before we drive it long distance. And that's kind of what we're doing here with the revenues. We try to keep the expenses at a minimum as best we can with the inflationary problems we've already discussed. But so we are basing these revenues strictly off the rate model. But I will say that, remember, as part of the rate structure decision, we did, by lowering the base rates, we did move some of the debt service funding and so forth from base rates, which was a more guaranteed line revenue. We talked about this in previous Finance Committee meetings and in the board meeting when the model was adopted. And we've moved it to volume rates. And of course, when you go to a tier of residential volume rates, we don't know that that's going to cause some conservation. I mean, the more you use, the higher the per thousand gallon cost is. So it could lead to some usage conservation, which could impact revenues naturally. So this is kind of a test year. So I will just say that it's 8%. And these are what the model is projecting, and we feel pretty comfortable with that. We've actually done some analysis on the model and gone back with the consultant that developed the model and said, this number, explain this number to me. How did you get this number? So we've done kind of as best we can a review. So that's kind of my ordinance-wide discussion. The non-billing revenue stays fairly stable. That's sure. Different fees and some engineering fees and a little bit of miscellaneous revenue. It doesn't, I remind the committee, have any system development fees in there. Just like the current fiscal year, we have not budgeted any system development fees for the upcoming year. Mark and I discussed that, and we just don't know what that number is going to be. The other advantage to not budgeting in the original ordinance is that money has to be earmarked. We talked about this in the financial quarterly updates. It has to be earmarked for a capital project. It can't be used to offset operating budget. So by leaving it out of this budget, now if it were a large number, we would put it in there and you would see a fund balance addition to offset it, so that it's very clear to the public that we're not using that money for operating expenses. But since it's undetermined and probably going to be very small, considering the limited development we can allow in that coming year, it's left out of the budget. So I will say that's not in your non-billing revenue line. Interest income, we had a very in-depth discussion about this just a week ago at the board meeting. So we think that $485, just under $500,000, is a reasonable estimate. That's assuming that the rates stay the same or possibly go up in March. Federal Reserve is projected to increase slightly again in March. And assuming a stable amount of money in the bank, which I think is a good assumption. Of course, we know we've got some cash outflow and flow delays because we're spending money on the I-5 project with grant money. but we have to pay it out and get reimbursed for it, so there can be a 30, 60-day lag sometimes on that. So that could affect, those types of things could affect our cash flow and our interest income projections. But I think we're comfortable with this number for next year. If the interest rates were to do like this year and go from 0 to X% in a drastic short amount of time, if it went the opposite direction in the upcoming year, of course, we would come to the board with budget amendment accordingly when that happens. But I don't foresee that happening in the 12 months. So the total revenues and financing sources, before we get to that, you'll see the transfer from fund balance, appropriated fund balance is a 0. That should make all of us happy. That's our goal. That's a good balanced budget. When you see a 0 on that line, we're in good shape. So the total revenues and financing sources is $15,289,040. Any questions on the revenue section?
That looks good.
And we will reference that back to the current year that we looked at a little while ago, that ordinance. So we're looking at $15.3 million here. And if you look back at that one, we're talking about 14.3. And remember that included $645,000 worth of fund balance. So you're only talking about $1 million difference, which is good, but of course, 5.5 of that is your interest income that you didn't have last year. So that's a reasonable number, so I guess I'm trying to say. Okay.
So, the $35 million, we spend it, we ask for reimbursement, so it's kind of like a 0 net effect.
Other than
And that's why other financing sources in this is still 0, because there's, am I right?
That's a very good question, and so let me explain that. Let me touch on that very briefly, because that is a very good question that, because I see it every day, I don't think to put it somewhere. But it does need to be put out there. So the reason that's not budgeted is because as an authority, we don't have a capital projects fund like a county or city is allowed to have. We must have it all rolled into the enterprise fund. So we have contracts right now for engineering services, so we know you have dedicated X amount of that $35 million toward that project. Instead of budgeting that here, the reason we don't budget that here right now is because we're in February and we don't know what unspent balance is going to be at June 30th to put in this budget. So if we put a placeholder, it would be truly a guesstimate.
Right.
So it's better, in my opinion, to leave that out. And you would see an offsetting, as you said, an offsetting on the other side reimbursement. So they would wash in the total budget anyway to a net 0. So why clutter the budget up with a truly wild guesstimate?
I'm glad I
6 months early.
Yeah.
Right, so if you'll recall, last year, and this upcoming year we'll do the same thing, in July, we know how much we've expended of the $35 million by June 30th. So in July, bring your budget amendment to roll that capital project and the corresponding other financing sources forward into the ordinance. So we do it by amendment, I guess. I've told you a lot of information to just say, we do that by amendment.
So, is there, I'm sure you have to do a reporting and keep track of this $35 million since it's ARPA funds, and there's probably a report that goes with it. Is it possible, like, you could make a small report with the board about the progress of that $35 million somewhere, like every 4 months or 6 months or something?
Right. So in the financial report for this year that I could do to the board each quarter, remember I added 2 slides that show you of that money, how much we've expended and how much we've gotten reimbursed. At the end of last quarter, it was net 0. Now, I mentioned at the board meeting that we did have 2 that we had submitted for reimbursement we hadn't received payments for. Yesterday, we received one of those 2, and I've asked where the other one is. So typically, it's a 30-day turnaround. But yes, on a quarterly basis. Now, if you wanted to see that on some more frequent basis, I can certainly do that, or in some other format. I can be flexible.
Quarterly is fine. Thank you, Richard.
So, if we, I'm going to read each of these individually.
No, just simply say we just have a list of our expenditures that balance our revenues.
So, in your ordinance, your proposed ordinance, you see, as you always do, the departmentalized budgets for each of the departments, and of course, you'll see the expenditures equal that same $15,289,040. Not a huge swing in any given department over the prior year. So there's nothing there to highlight to say, well, this one went up dramatically. Of course, we saw across the board increases in the water and wastewater departments, mainly chemicals, supplies, and fuel. And so that's kind of in a nutshell the ordinance.
I'd like to highlight, well, first of all, are there any questions, comments, in addition from the Finance Committee?
We have 50,000 in projects and studies, that's just, we have nothing coming up right now, but that's just in case we need it, kind of thing, correct?
We had 50 last year.
Yeah.
Oh, the 7300 series?
Yes, 7,300, yes, sir.
Yeah, well, and you know us quite well, that we always have projects and
We
stuff.
always do,
roll all the
so
time
it's best
for
to
that.
put it in
That's
there.
usually in our budget amendments that we present to you every other month, it seems like, so.
Well, I'm glad that we are ahead of it this time.
Well, we do put some money in there for that, but we have, on the horizon, just this fiscal year, we've got the lead and copper contractual services that Mark will be bringing to the board in March. We have the PFAS testing that Mark will be bringing to the board in March. We have on the horizon some additional PFAS analysis that we're working on that may come to the board before the end of the fiscal year. We've got other regulatory programs that we have to respond to that we're working on at the same time. Keep in mind, though, that Mark has been very aggressive in working on grants for AIA for water and also AIA for sewer. Is there anything that you want to comment on at this point about any of those grants, or just bring those up at a future board meeting?
Well, just briefly, we were awarded the $150,000 grant for the distribution system. That project is about to kick off, and I don't remember if I mentioned it at the last board meeting or not, but we submitted an application in September for I believe it was a $200,000 grant for sewer, and they haven't officially awarded it, but we were on the preliminary list to get that. So that's $200,000, and as long as that list is approved by the DEQ board this month, we'll have that money to work on, our wastewater system.
Thank you, Mark.
More pump stations and data analysis and asset inventories for us, which is good, so very good. The only other item I'd like to highlight, if I may, is section 3 on page 13. This has been an item that has had some discussion by the Finance Committee and the board over the last several years when we talk about budgets. And this is the executive director's authority to make transfers as necessary up to a maximum of $2,500. So I would just like to mention to the board that you have approved my purchasing authority up to $30,000 for items, and I have emergency authorization up to $90,000 in this. And you know from all the budget amendments that you see us moving. There's a lot of items on our budget amendments because of that number right there on this page here. Rich and I have had some discussion about this in terms of what's the correct number, and I don't have a correct number for this, but I will offer that I think that $2,500 maximum could go up a little bit, quite honestly, which just is helping the business operation move forward through us. We still have fiscal control through our finance director as well, and still following fiscal policy. It's just that it's a little bit lean, I've discovered in the last 3 years.
Right.
To keep business moving forward, so entertaining a $10,000 maximum might be appropriate this time, or value. So I don't need a decision from the finance committee today, or even comments unless you want to make that, but just give that some consideration as we're moving forward here in this discussion. We also have a future board meeting coming up in March.
I was just going to say, was that something that should go on the March agenda?
Oh, it could easily move to the March agenda.
Because I was thinking 10,000, you said 10,000. If you feel that that's good enough for you.
Is that gonna put you where you need to be?
I think it's a good incremental change, quite honestly.
2,500 is, I don't know,
I-
it's 2,500.
I didn't either. When I looked at it, you're right, that was too low.
We buy a printer and it's
And poor
2,500.
Richard's doing all these budget amendments.
Well, he will still faithfully do all the budget amendments.
Right.
That's not an issue, but it just
But you
provides
need
just a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, you need a little bit more
To
flexibility.
sign off on a change, interdepartment, if we will, or department within those values, just to keep moving forward. And then anything above that, obviously, which is the catalog, with the BA and the future of the board.
You're okay with that?
Can we make it the 10 and then?
I'll look at the general statutes to make sure there's nothing that would prohibit us from that, but there is a rule against appropriation. So as long as it's in, a net zero effect on the overall budget, I think I feel comfortable with 10,000 as long as general statute doesn't prohibit it. I think the 2,500 is an old.
Yeah, that's gotta be just-
That's been in budget ordinances for 100 years, and we know you said you can't buy anything for 2,500.
No.
Is this something we should run by the attorney first, or?
I'll look at the general statutes and make sure I should be able to determine that, but we can always consult with the attorney if we think there's a legal question regarding that. But I think we can determine that from school government guidelines.
Yes, it's not a question of the increase, it's a question of, doing it in a way that we can.
Right.
That
We need to make sure that.
Yeah, we remain compliant.
And then, if I can, are we leaving the ordinance, or you just have to get the ordinance?
I just want to make a note here that we can, with the finance committee, I'd like to just move that topic to the next meeting. Is that what I'm hearing? Or are you providing us with direction today that we can move in that direction as long as we are aligned with state statutes?
That's my recommendation, the latter.
Yeah,
Okay.
as long as we are not violating any state statute, let's do it.
Okay.
And we
I don't
can,
think we
We'll follow up
are.
on that. We can provide some information back to the finance committee on that.
right, and if we have if we're having a second finance committee meeting, we can bring that into the final ordinance that we're bringing today for presentation.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Richard, what else? Anything?
Before we move from the ordinance, and I should have hit this when we were going through, the only thing I will point out, just the finance committee, but also the public that may be listening, of the 15.3 million budgeted expenses, 2.5 of that is for depreciation and other things that are kind of outside of our control. So 2.3 of that's definitely depreciation. And another 3.8 million is debt service, which of course we cannot reduce. So if you look at it that way, of the 15.3 million, 25% of that is debt service. There's nothing we can do to reduce debt service. You say, well, but just keep in mind that in 2015, that number
It was
was
a lot
33%.
higher.
So it used to be a third of every dollar which debt service has a quarter. And the depreciation accounts for, that department accounts for 16%. So you're talking about 41% of the 15.3 million. So the kind of set in stone that we have no flexibility. So that makes the 15.3 look a little better, is that, some of that's outside of our control.
Do we have any substantial amount of debt that's coming off within the next
Yes,
year or
sir.
two?
Well,
Because I was gonna say,
We got 2 more years on that.
the magic year, I've heard that question a lot,
Yeah.
Mr. Gooch, in the last few months, internally and externally. And yes, we have charts that show that in the 26-27 year is when debt will start dropping off. Several of the original debts for Wassa will start dropping off in the 26-27 fiscal year, and then even more in the 27-28. And then it will stabilize after that 27-20. So 2 fiscal years in a row, we'll have a lot of the original debt and some of the Creedmoor acquisition debt dropping off. Of course, we've got the largest loan, which is the wastewater treatment upgrade.
Don't point your finger at me, point it at her.
But we,
I know, right? You had to throw that
I
out.
didn't point. I'm sure you I didn't point. I may have clicked. So that number would drop dramatically. The end of the 27-28 fiscal year would drop significantly, I will say dramatically. Assuming we don't incur new debt to offset for the capital project for ICOM. So yes, that is correct. There are several SunTrust loans from DHHS originally, the town of Butler MOU agreement payments. I believe the BB&T, which is now Truist, bond to acquire Creedmoor, and they have a Deaner loan that they acquire Creedmoor. So all of the loans except the largest one for the wastewater plant, and there's a couple of USDAs that in the Creedmoor acquisition we got. And then the other 2 or 3 small ones that we have in DEQ are very small loans. Our loans were way back in 2010, I think. And they're 0 interest, so they're not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the maintenance of the giant tower included in this budget? I know you mentioned it.
All the towers.
Okay. It looked low for me for what the damage is to that tower and how old it is. I thought it was a little low, but
Yeah.
as long as it's in there.
And that is, I'll address that by saying that We have reports on all the towers as far as maintenance that is needed for those, low cost, high cost. And then we look at those and we do value propositions on, well, should we spend this on this old infrastructure? Or should we spend that more in the future on a replacement tower? And if you're talking about the tower opposite the water treatment plant, you know, from previous discussion, that 80-year-old tower needs to be updated in the future. We're thinking more of a ground installation tower in front of the water plant, not another tower in the air, which is a lower tank, if you will. So that's on the horizon. So I would like to just jump back to questions by Mr. Gooch and debt. The schedules that we presented to the board this fiscal year, talking about the I-85 project and how to fund that with the USDA long-term debt. We have shown you schedules that although we would like to move faster on the I-85 project, our debt schedules and our affordability really doesn't come into alignment until 26, 27, 28, when this debt starts to fall off. And it really is now the springboard for moving forward with the I-85 project as far as the debt financing that we need. So those are critical points, and we've shown that in many charts to the board and in the public as well. But that's a key year that we see debt coming down, and that amount of debt that comes off then makes it affordable for us now to assume the debt for moving forward for the I-85 project. So it really times up well, and we really don't want to speed up the project more than our current schedule, and we have a really good schedule to meet those timelines and get the project out. But that's how that all comes into play. And we can revisit that again if the board would like to see that in the future. It's something that will come back to the board probably in the next, possibly before the end of this fiscal year, as we get closer to our application acceptance with the USDA and what that means, so we can bring a package back to the board and say, okay, now we know, here's where we are, here's how we've been accepted, here's the terms or whatever, here's the amount, and here's how this moves us forward. And we'll have those schedules, we'll have something a little bit more tangible to discuss with the board at that point. So I would hope that that would be before the end of this fiscal year, right? So, and I'm pointing at Mark because he's our project manager for I-85, and also he and CDM, our contract engineer, work with the USDA staff all the time, making sure we've met the requirements for the application, because it's an extremely deep application process as far as the requirements.
The submittal of that to USDA is on the horizon. I can't commit how long it will take USDA to go through all that paperwork. It's not the most complex application I've ever worked on.
But our debt service that we're in right now, the amount of debt we have that's falling off is greater than what we feel at this time that we're going to need to complete the I-85 again.
The original
Are we
projections that we
over
brought to the board and the finance committee, was it the finance committee or the board? I don't know.
The board.
That we brought to you a few months ago were trying to project what we could borrow, how much debt we could borrow, and still keep those debt payments flat by the end of 27, 28. So in other words, we were saying, here's how much we can borrow at this interest rate and still keep those
Right.
that debt
I remember
service
that.
equal, so that at least it's not an increase.
Right.
And that's the projections we've had thus far. Of course, as we see interest income rise, and what does that mean? It's what costs more to borrow money as well. So some of those projections are already antiquated now. So those, as Scott said and Mark said, when we get closer to that USDA magic, here's the number and here's the interest rate that we think we can lock in. We can give you more concrete numbers and charts to reflect that. And just wait and engineer all of that.
I will absolutely do that.
So, okay, Finance Committee, we are sitting about 90 minutes into this meeting. We have about another 90 minutes to go. So, maybe finish up a little bit before that, but I'm looking at the clock on the wall saying, we hope to finish by noon at the latest. Does the committee want to take a break at this point, or just continue to move forward? Continue to move forward?
Sure.
All right, fantastic. All right, let's move on to page 14, FY 23-24 rate review comparison in 90% and 100% CIP funding. So I'm going to turn this over to Richard in just a moment, and you will see on page 15 that we have a chart, and this chart is a bill comparison to CIP funding options. So I think that it's very clear, and we'll move from the left side of the chart to the right side of the chart. And Richard, I will have you go ahead and take care of now explaining what this chart means in front of us.
Okay, so on page 15, what we tried to do for the budget discussion and the rate discussion tied to the budget for fiscal year 23-24 is go back and somewhat mirror the Rapatellis presentations of rates that they gave you to kind of make it comparable to what they showed you and what you've seen in the past to make it a little bit more understandable. So what we've done here is we've given you a bill comparison, not a rate comparison, because why didn't we do rate comparisons? In all past years, we showed you old rates and new rates, and here's the base rate and the new base rates and the volume rate and so forth. The reason we didn't do it that way this time is because you're changing your total model structure.
Right.
So you wouldn't be comparing apples to apples like we did it that way. So instead, we said, well, how would it affect the typical residential rates? And keep in mind, this is residential rates only. I don't know if it stipulates that on here anywhere. Because commercial rates are not here, as we talked about earlier in the discussion. So here's what we've done for you is given you the same buckets of usage and bill projections that Rapatellis did in their original rate model presentations to the board. We've given you a zero usage customer, which is a true base rate now, because it used to be that you had 2,000 gallons in your base rate. Now it's zero. So you'll see that the first yellow bar with the blue numbers in the bar, that's what Rapatellis showed you a zero customer would be. Now keep in mind, it bears in mind that in all of the discussions with Rapatellis and their presentations to the Finance Committee and Board, we asked them to make it clear that the data they were basing it on was 2 years old by the time they did the rate study, because of course you have to have a fiscal year closed before you can get actual data to use in the rate model. So as we go into 23-24, the data they used for projections was the most recent data at that time when they started the model review, but it is now approaching 2 years old. So of course their expenses didn't have any of the inflationary factors we've seen in the last 18 months in built in. But you'll see that their projection for a zero customer base rate was $47.96. The blue bars are the current rates. What would that customer pay at current rates? So currently that customer is paying $86.84, but they get 2,000 gallons built into that base. The green bar is the proposed 23-24 budget, which flows through the whole agenda today at the 90% funding, which the Finance Committee has already indicated they're in favor of. The base rate for that customer under the new rate structure effective July 1st of 23 would be $44.64. And if you decided to go to 100% funding of CIP rather than 90%, what would that base be? It would be $47.29. And that methodology goes all the way through the chart. And I won't go through each of the categories, but you'll see that the trend is very similar to what Rapatellis presented to the board, is that your 0 to 2,000 gallon customers will see either a savings or, in this case, because of the inflationary expense increases we built into the budget, now instead of the 2,000 customer being 86.84 currently, I think Rapatellis' original projection was 86.54, so the same, basically the same. You'll see that that bill may go up 70 cents or 68 cents. And you'll see that going across the board. So as we knew when the board adopted the new rate structure, the tiered rate structure, there is a break-even point where some people below that point will see a reduction in their monthly billing.
Right.
Some people will see an increase in their monthly billing. And so this chart reflects those here for the board to see and see if the Finance Committee to see if you're kind of on board with those rates. But that's the rates with everything else you've seen thus far in the budget discussion.
Well, the change is very minimal, so I don't think it's anything too drastic. Like when you get to the 2,000 gallon, 86.84 to 87.52.
Well, I appreciate that, and something I would also like to say to support that is you can see graphically in front of us here what that rate model did as far as what we were trying to achieve. And the Finance Committee and the board discussed this quite a bit, that you've got a large savings towards zero and not so much a large savings at the upper end of this scale right here. This is a 10,000 customer, and we have tiers built in that in case of that volume. We also talked about in Finance Committees about how could you tweak these numbers here and there, what do you get? And I think the great example we had was the seesaw. that fulcrum's in the middle of that seesaw. So when you change, you're not gonna get a whole lot in the middle, you're gonna get more of a change at either end. So you can see that here in what we have in front of us. I think that the things that I would like to point out, two more things are, I did mention early on about the 90% and the 100% as far as funding depreciation. I know it's a goal to get us to 100%. And when you look at this chart in front of you and you look at the yellow bar to the far right of each column in comparison to the next one to the left, which is the proposed 90% CIP, you can see that we are very close. We are getting very close to closing that gap. And possibly in future years, with maybe some additional revenue coming in, maybe we'll be able to tighten that back up to 100%. So I'm glad to see that, and I thought it was appropriate to show the Finance Committee how close we are so that you can see it. We are not recommending going to 100% unless that's the Finance Committee's recommendation. That's up to you, but I just wanted to show you how close it was. Secondly, I really want the Finance Committee and the board to appreciate looking at these columns, especially the 0 to 2 or 3,000, that based on the Raphtalis presentation, the model that we did based on rates of about 2 years ago, that did not factor in inflation. I think that we've done a really good job as far as being fiscally conservative here in our approach to not use fund balance to support this, to stay at 90% depreciation, to offer all the programs that we're continuing to offer and make changes, and not adding staff, making cuts where we can. And you look at these values where we are with these rates here, I think that our team has done a very good job to present to the Finance Committee a really good budget at this point. So I just want you to, in case it doesn't stand out to you on the page, that's what I see in these values here.
One of the greatest concerns I had was that we were going to have to lower depreciation back down. And I think in 2019, when I came on, it was 80%, we went up to 85, then we went up to 90. And I think that's important to me too.
It is very important. We did actually take a look at that through several models that we did, but we understand that even though you might be able to lower the money that you're putting aside for depreciation, that's an expense that you do have to face, and you start to get behind when you do that. Right. However, we saw some benefit in taking that money and pushing it over to some current needs that we have that fall outside CIP that are more operational. But we were able to stand on, no, let's just keep the 90% if we can into this budget and move forward.
And I think for comparative, dovetailing off your discussion, if you take, for instance, 3,000 gallon field, Raphtalis projected 105.89, we're recommending 108.96. That's less than a 3% change from what Raphtalis did on inflationary factors over 2 years, where inflation is running 7 to 10%. So the rates only increased less than 3%. I don't know that you can ask for more balance than that.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But that's not a rate increase, that's just a
bill increase on that specific type of deal.
Just the way the bill will lay out.
But that just gives you some insight into at a time when we're seeing 7 to 10% inflationary increases in our operating expenses, we've managed to keep the rate increase much lower than that, and the overall budget increase much lower than that inflationary budget.
Because the customers don't get their bill.
Yeah, they are.
That's the difference for them. What does that bill say?
It's based on volume. There's some control on that now, so there was some pressure to reduce that 2,000 gallon minimum. So, okay, any further questions or comments by the Finance Committee? Okay. All right, so we will move on to page 16, which is the FY 23-24 proposed budget review topics, review of services and fees. So on page 17, I have a memo to the Finance Committee that says, staff is presently updating the board-approved FY 22-23 scheduled rates, fees, and charges. I refer to that as the fee schedule for the FY 23-24 budget. Staff finds it most efficient to update the many data tables within the fee schedule once the Finance Committee has provided direction to staff on the proposed budget. Staff looks forward to providing the Finance Committee with a draft update overview of the fee schedule at an upcoming meeting. So if the Finance Committee recalls, we went through a major lift last year change to our rate and fee schedule booklet in terms of creating, instead of just data tables, but definitions of what we were doing. And the Finance Committee approved that last year for us, and the board approved that in total. What we are promoting today and proposing in our FY23-24 budget, and what the committee may ultimately approve, that data comes right back into that volume next, because we have a lot of details in terms of these costs for meters and fees and so on and so forth. So it's really appropriate to say we're aware of that. Once we get some direction, we can bring that to the Finance Committee at the next meeting and have that discussion. We also take a look at throughout the year, well, what were our costs for these services? What effect has inflation had on those services as far as things that we need to purchase to perform that service? And one example is when we have to do installations of water lines where there's construction across the street, to tap into a sewer line, a water line, construction activities and materials, we've seen that shift come up. So we take a look at those costs as well. We also take a look at, are there any program definitions that need to change? Is there anything that needs to be added? And we've discovered a couple of areas where we were absent on those last year, so they will be added to this year's volume, and we'll have an opportunity to see that in our usual red line underscored type of documents so that you can follow along with what's been updated. So that will be coming forward to the Finance Committee at our next meeting in March to review that. So beyond that, I have nothing more really to present to you at this point. There isn't a volume to go through. I mean, it's a lengthy volume, but I didn't think it was really appropriate today to page through that. It's going to be more substantial in the next meeting. So is there anything else or anything the board would like to say?
I just wanted to ask Richard, I think it was the Hope Foundation that the governor started during COVID. Was the Hope?
For tenants.
Yeah, for tenants and stuff.
Yeah.
Have we finally collected all the payments that people had applied for? I know there was a lag in finding out if the payments were coming. There was no communication for a while.
To my knowledge, we have all that sorted out now. I will say, in response to that question, that I received a somewhat surprising notice about 4 weeks ago that one of the big problems with that implementation, of course, it was a huge amount of money thrown into things without any internal controls at the time. So we were running into a problem where the customers were applying for the subsidy, it wasn't getting paid to us, and we had a big problem there with pledges. We worked with the program administrators that were assigned to us at the time the program was implemented to say, now we're getting payments that some customers have already paid because they were approaching a disconnection situation, so they had to pay in advance. What do you want to do with this money? Apply it to their account for future bills. And at the beginning they said, no, you must return it. So we were returning those checks to them. Then we got guidance from them that says, no, go ahead and apply it. But we did receive, getting back to my original comment about the disturbing letter I got about 4 weeks ago, is we got a notice from Hope that this payment was paid for a bill that the customer had already paid, you paid us back.
Oh my! This is very nice.
And so I responded to that with a written response that this customer has left us months ago. The account's closed. They left on a huge balance of money, and now if we turn around and refund you even part of that money, we're absorbing Sawassa's customers are absorbing the bad debt for the internal control problem you had that you told us specifically posted anyway,
Right.
and now you want your money back. That was not, I will tell you, the state was not well received by the state, but they did email me back and say, in light of the guidance and information you provided, we possibly agree with you, we're going to kick it up the ladder for discussion, because my comment in my response to them was, this particular payment does not bother me so much, but this one was 18, 20 months ago.
Oh.
If you have another 100 payments in the pipeline that you told us to post, and now you're going to say, no, we changed our mind, give us our money back, it could be a substantial hit to Sawassa's receivables.
Right.
And we just don't think that's reasonable, that you told us. We had emails saying, no, now you post it, you go. And luckily, by us keeping that documentation and providing it to them, they're reviewing it. The letter was, you must pay us back within 30 days or XYZ is going to happen. that's not necessarily appropriate for government organizations to have another government organization anyway.
Yeah.
So I will tell you that, yes, the pipeline's clear, but now there's some question about a program that I didn't know, which is now they're doing the audits and saying, oops, we shouldn't have paid for this deal, that deal, and another deal. So now the organization gives us the money back, not the customer. See,
Wow.
we're
I
up
don't
in
know
the
where
can-
that question came from, it just popped into
I
my
don't either,
head.
but you opened the can of worms with that one.
I'm
I think
sorry,
it's probably
I'm
not-
you're getting redder as you speak.
Yeah, they should have better internal controls.
Right, and it's just, that's the Guasa, it's the Guasa's cash flow, it's the Guasa and the rest of the customers.
Yeah.
We can't have the state saying, we made a mistake, now you absorb the bad debt for it. I just don't think that's reasonable. So
No.
I thought at least I needed to respond to it in writing rather than just pay them and say, okay, we'll just pay them whenever, if you send 20 more, we'll pay them too. I probably needed at least someone up the ladder to say, wait a minute, maybe we need to rethink this.
Right.
Very
But
good.
that's just one, it could be another one coming up.
Well, that's what he said, it could be 20 of them.
And we don't know that number, so I couldn't project it. But this one was substantial for one payment. It wasn't the normal base $86, it was a substantial amount. And I thought, okay, if you multiply that times 100 more coming, we're talking about tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that's not.
Can't absorb that.
Well, thank you, Rich.
Yeah, I don't know why you asked that one.
I don't
Oh, well, can you
It
detour
just
off of-
popped into my head, and I was like, what if we got all that money into that?
All right, Richard, you get to break on the next two subjects. Compose yourself. So
Move on to other things.
Be ready. So we want to move on to page 18 and 19, which is the proposed FY 23-24 budget review topic related to our proposed plan update for our CIP program. So you'll see in my memo to the Finance Committee here as well that Mark's here and will provide the Finance Committee with an overview of the status of the draft CIP that will include in the FY 23-24 budget. He'll talk about it in general because we'll look forward to providing the Finance Committee with more information at the next meeting, basically. And again, you understand why, because we want to understand where we're going with this budget, and then we'll be able to tighten it up and you'll present some documents. So, Mark, I'll turn it over to you.
So Wassa has never had an approved long-term CIP plan. It's obviously important in our operations, but it's also important for funding. USDA requires that you have a 10-year CIP approved. So obviously we're working toward that. Spent the past year plus working with our staff, identifying needs in the field, and our distribution and collection systems and our lift stations. A lot of work with our superintendent, identifying projects that we need at the plants. Also looking at the results from our asset inventory projects, from the grants that we've received. And we have compiled a vast list of projects. A lot more projects have been identified than we could possibly do in a 10-year CIP. So what we're doing now is trying to take the money that is going to be set aside for the capital fund balance for the funding depreciation, and prioritizing the projects that we can actually do with that money. We have a rough CIP in place now. I need to refine that some more over the next couple weeks. And then I would look to present more information to the Finance Committee at the next meeting, and then ultimately, one of the following board meetings to present that for final approval. But it's a good project. It'll be interesting to everybody to see just how much is out there.
We're also researching, we're looking at, we have just in the last 3 or 4 months, a new container, a software program to help us with that, to manage that as well. So with the help of Mark and Dan, our new utility engineer, they look to kind of populate that database in the future as well with our plans to make it easier for us to budget and manage as we move forward. Mark, I don't recall, do you need or want a CIP approved sooner than the fiscal year budget, potentially in May? Do you need that for the USDA?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think before they award, I think we would need it.
Okay.
But just one other project that is required, we have to update our SDS, system development fees every 5 years, and that is due in November of this year. So we're working with a consultant now, and to really accurately define what our SDFEs need to be, we need a capital plan to do that, because they base those system development fees on the items that we have in that capital plan.
Right. So that's the relationship. So we identify all of our needs through a CIP plan for 10, 15, 20 years. And part of the analysis that they do on figuring out these system development fees are what those costs are related to. Some of these expansion projects basically borne by this expansion, it relates back to that. So that's how those fees are evaluated as well. So that's a project that's ongoing, the SDFP review at this point, so that we have that wrapped up before November. If there is a change to that, of course, that legislation will have to come to the board for review, but the initial part by November is to get the report done. That's the requirement of the analysis. It isn't to have the board approve anything before November. So most likely that will kick off in December or January, be brought to the board to take a look at that. So you will, then the timing wise for the CIP will be that the schedule will fold into the budget, basically. So it'll be a companion piece. So when the board does approve the budget in May, let's just say, or June. May it is. June's our background. We'd like to get to the board in May with the public hearings so that you have an opportunity, but we know that June's a backup opportunity for us as well to get it done before the end of the.
One caveat.
Yeah.
There are a couple of customers that contractually we must notify them X number of days. And so the May assists us with making sure we get that written notification of them within contractual guidelines.
So you'll have an operating budget and a CIP all together along with the rates and fee schedule. That's basically your budget document that will ask the board to approve.
Gonna be that simple?
It could be. It should be, but it could be. So any questions or comments by the committee regarding CIP at this point?
Mark, you do a lot more than people think you do.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So I support that in our 10-year plan.
Do not encourage you.
The system development fees, the CIP, nobody has any idea that you do any of that stuff. Well, thank you.
They will.
Yeah.
90% of this time is budgeting me for money. That's 90%
Somebody's
Is
got
that most of his job description?
That's or he thinks that he is. I keep trying to correct him, but he hasn't learned it yet.
Richard just sends it down to hold the Scots on.
That's right. I normally do.
He collects and he spends it. I'm the referee in between, so it works out well. All right, let's move on to page 20 and 21 in 22 and 23, which is our series on FY 23-24 personal position reviews. So I have for the committee on page 21 a copy of the board approved organizational chart for you. It's a little bit challenging to read, but we keep this up to date, and we're actually showing you the different disciplines, the number of positions we have in each category. We have employees' names on that this year, and we have some vacancies that are out there that you will notice. Not too many. We've been doing a great job this year filling those vacancies. So I see an operator over in the wastewater treatment plant. I see a vacancy in customer service, utility billing specialist, which we're aware of. We have plans for that, so that's moving along quite well. So just a cover page, where you will, as far as our organizational chart. Again, we've already had the discussion that there's a need for 5 positions that we would like to add to this, but there's been nothing added to this budget year reflected here. If there were, I would have shown you a existing and proposed chart. Moving on to the next 2 pages, pages 22 and 23. This is our Seguasa classification scale for FY 22 and 23, effective July 1st. So again, this is a table that the board approved this following the approval of the actual budget. So it will be common to see this update with a 5% COLA across the board, coming to the board essentially in June. If we have a budget approval in May, it may also come across in July, but we try to get this done in June. So there is no schedule change at this time. You're looking at positions. You see some highlights on here. These highlights are related to last year's positions and titles that the board approved, so I just left them highlighted for discussion points if you wanted to take a look at that. But this is pretty much static at this point until we get to the next meeting, and then we can do updates on that, or just provide that updated schedule at the upcoming board meeting in June and July, knowing that it's how it's reflected. So, any questions or comments based on what you see in front of you as far as the classification scale or jobs at this point, as far as descriptions? And again, there is no expansion to this, it's just basically the classifications and grades related to them.
None for me.
Okay. Well, with that, then we will move on to other topics on page 24 and 25 for contract audit services for fiscal year 22-23. So again, as we come out of this fiscal year, get past this and close the books, then we have auditing that has to be done. So actually, the task occurs next fiscal year, but it's for this current fiscal year for the audit. So I'll turn this over to Richard to talk about the audit services RFP in the process moving forward. Richard?
Sure. I won't read the whole memo that we have on the agenda because it basically just reiterates what you already know, that the general statute we have to have an annual audit. But just to kind of reiterate the paragraph, the last time we went out for audit, for bid for audit and RFP was for the 6/30/2020, 1920 3 years ago. This would be the 4th year with our existing audit. As a general rule, the BOSSA goes out for RFPs on audit every 3 to 5 years, depending on the finance committee's interest in doing so. There have been years when we went 5, there have been other years when we did 3. We thought this was a prime time to go back out for audit at the 4th year for several reasons. As you know, we had yellow book audits, which were very simple audits for the last several years because we didn't have enough federal or state grant money flowing through to cause a single audit. Of course, that's going to change with the 22-23 fiscal year because we've got the grant that we've discussed throughout the meeting. And we foresee that project going on all the way through, I believe, 26 at least. So that will cause a single audit, I think, for the next 3 fiscal years. So we thought this was a perfect opportunity. There's a lot of conflicting guidance, I will say, in my opinion. When the ARPA money came out and started getting distributed, there was a lot of conflicting guidance on must you rebid because now you've got federal dollars and it's a single audit and is it UG procurement, is it not? The original guidance said yes, everyone must regardless of any circumstances. Then they said, well, we'll caveat out if you do this then you don't have to, but if you do that, you do. With all that confusion, we thought it was best to just go ahead and do an audit. I will say that because our audit historically has fallen under the $10,000 guidelines, that's a small micro purchase according to UG procurement, so we probably exclude it anyway. But we thought this was the perfect time, with it becoming a single audit for the next subsequent years, to go out in the 4th year and do bids. So, as I think we've talked about in previous finance committee meetings, unfortunately, statewide, we're seeing a huge decrease in the amount of auditors and audit firms that are willing to take on audits, especially small ones. Right. Some of the firms that I've known colleagues that work in said, okay, we only bid on ones that are 100,000 or above, or 50,000 or above. So most of your local auditors, the small firms, have just dropped out of the business because there's so many independence rules now that prohibit them from making any journal entries and so forth. And so many of the small entities require journal entries, and the auditor historically has done all that for them. So we were a little concerned, Scott and I talked about this before we did the RFP, we were a little concerned that we didn't want to lose the one auditor we have, but they said, well, if you're going to bid it, we're just not going to bid this time. But we decided it was best to go out there and see. So what we did is we looked at how best to distribute it. So I looked around and talked to some colleagues to see how they had done theirs in recent years. We determined that probably the best way to reach the auditor audience for North Carolina was to go by the LGC's auditor list. And they just updated that list, unfortunately, about a week or 2 weeks after we had posted our RFP, so it may be slightly different. But in short, that list, I believe, started with about roughly 50 audit firms and auditors in North Carolina. What we did was we pared that down or narrowed it down and filtered it Anybody that listed that they didn't do audits in Central North Carolina, then we took those out of the list. Any that said we don't do authorities, we took those out of the list. And so what we wound up with was about 29 firms and auditors left on the list. So we distributed directly, and of course we posted it on our website and on the normal website at the same time, but we distributed via email to all the contacts on that LGC list that fit the criteria that they would do authorities and they would do an authority in Central North Carolina. Of those 29 that we distributed, and we did that on January 13, 2023, we received 5 no bids. The typical responses that we were afraid of, that we're not taking any new audits, or we no longer do audits. And we received 2 responses immediately that they did intend to bid. The closing date for the bids with the RFP proposals was yesterday. Scott and I will, of course, as the review, in the RFP, I think it says we're the review committee. So we'll review both of those, but I was hoping we'd get at least 3, because then if any UG procurement requirements did apply, we would have 3. I'm almost certain if we tried to rebid, we wouldn't get 3. We'll be reviewing those 2 and bringing a recommendation to the committee as soon as we have that review completed. But luckily, we did at least receive 2, and one of those I will disclose was from our existing auditor. And I think that's pretty much it for the audit review services. And then, of course, we'll bring, in the RFP, I will say that we did the RFP that we wanted to propose it for the current fiscal year 22-23, of course, but we also wanted to project a proposal for at least 2 more subsequent years. So we will have a 3-year unofficial commitment with the firm that we select, that unless things change and we're unhappy with the service or price increases past their proposal, that we would at least stick with them 2 more years. And just to give you an idea of audit costs, our audit talking about the $10,000 limit, I don't anticipate it being higher in these proposals. In 06-07, our audit costs were $25,000. Starting in 08, it dropped to $7,000. And it has stayed under $10,000 pretty much ever since. So I think it's safe to say that we would be able to do better.
So it would be a contract for single ones for the next 3 years.
The contract by LG Plus general practice has to be annual, so we can't do a 3-year. Right. So we would bring to the board, if the finance committee agrees with our recommendation once we review the 2, we would bring an annual audit contract. So we would just bring this fiscal years to the board. I think I have that scheduled for maybe April. And then each year we will bring you a new contract for that fiscal year. With the understanding that we intend to stay with the auditor. Of course, they don't want to set up all the templates and programs and then after 1 year you leave them.
Right.
Right. But unfortunately we can't do a 3-year contract.
Gotcha. Okay. Because we ran into the same issue, Town of Butler, doing their, not a lot of people doing their audits anymore.
Town of Butler, last year Oxford, their auditor dropped their audit at the last minute and they had to go out to bid and couldn't get any bids. So, especially for small entities in this rural area, even though you're right outside of Durham and Raleigh, their audits in the big $100,000 audits. They don't want 5 small $20,000 audits. They definitely don't want a $10,000 necessarily.
All right, well, Richard, thank you for that information. And I don't think we have anything further on the audit services RFP. Now, looking at the agenda, we're going to be moving on to comments, recommendations from committee members and adjournment. But before we do, I would just like to say that I appreciate your time and your energy this morning, your conversation, going through our proposed budget with you. Again, I think it's a very good budget, considering all of the factors that we were dealing with this past year. And I want to thank Richard Ballmer, of course, our finance director, for the excellent work that he's done, and he always does for us. So, Richard, thank you for that. I also want to thank Mark. Thank you for your engineering work, and also, again, Mark is responsible for our utility operations area now. So he was really immersed this last year in operating budgets and operations for utility services. Did a fantastic job for us as well, and will continue to do that. So again, I appreciate the direction from the Vice Chair. Thank you very much as well. I would like to turn it over back to the Chair for comments, recommendations to committee members, and then finally adjournment.
Comments from me, I guess, would be to thank everyone for all the work that you've done to put into this meeting this morning. I'm really excited about the new 2023 rate scale and to see how that's going to work and get the feedback from the customers to see what their thoughts are around that. So a lot of time and effort was put into that. So job well done to all for that, and just excited about what's going to happen with Sawassa moving forward. So my comments.
I echo your comments. I am looking forward to this rate schedule going out and hopefully good feedback from our customers. I know that you guys worked very hard. Not using fund balance is great. I think that this budget has so much potential, and I'm really happy for it. I hope that we can increase the 401k to 2% for our employees for a matching. That would be nice. I'm looking forward to the capital improvement plan. I know that this has been a thorn in Scott's side. But the other question I have, since we're in the budget, we need a contract for the executive director. And it needs to be finalized. I know that it's been over 6 months since we started talking about it. And I would like to make sure that that is in place, and any changes that might come out of that contract that might affect this budget, is there anyone where it's in the hands of our attorney?
Well, it's a good comment. Rest assured that the chair and our attorney and myself are working on that, and it would be a great goal to have that wrapped up within a month or two, especially as we're working on this budget at the same time. So, thank you.
Because my personal opinions is we've got a great executive director, and I don't want to take any chance to lose.
Thank you. Appreciate that. One thing I forgot to mention, I should have done through my notes. No. This just in. Reminder that our next Finance Committee meeting is Thursday, March 16th at 9 a.m. at the Camp Butler Room, the day before St. Patrick's Day, so it'll be Thursday. And we will be bringing back to the Finance Committee information on the 401k program to make sure you'll see some of these changes occurring throughout that. And there's some other documents obviously that we'll be packaging up and bringing forward to that Finance Committee as well, because we're spending a lot of time on the CIP, I would imagine, at that. So, lastly, I forgot to thank Crystal Lee, our PIO and also board secretary, who's here today off camera, I believe, unless we see her on camera at some point. But thank you, Crystal, for helping with the agenda, the meeting setup, and all the technical work that you're doing for us. And of course, 2+ hours of minutes that you'll be typing up here very shortly before the next meeting. So with that, I'll just toss it back to the chair if you have anything further.
I don't have anything except to thank everyone for the work they've done, especially you guys on the staff here. You worked really hard on this budget, and we look forward to moving into the future. I hope we can get this 2% matching funds for 401k done for our employees. Like to see us go back to 100% depreciation, but we may have to stick here at 90 and move 95 and then 100. But we're moving in the right direction, and thank you for holding everything as tight this year as you have without the minimal increases. And I understand there's some increases to supplies and chemicals and such that are very unpredictable at this time. So we have to bear that in mind for the rest of the year. But thank you, and thank you, Linda, and thank you, Georgiana, for your work on this committee, and it's really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think this is the easiest budget meeting we've ever had.
It's one of the factors.
And we're not sending Richard back with 17,000 pages.
You know.
Adjournment. Quickly.
They changed the
Call for the motion, please.
Well, if there are no further comments, motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you all.